your previous lives, you served in law enforcement.
That's right, absolutely.
And so you have a unique perspective, I think, on what's going on.
I know that in America that we want to believe that the military and our law enforcement agencies, our public safety agencies, are inclusive or diverse because of what we see. The reality of it is that there are walls inside of these organizations where minorities serve along with non-minority colleagues, where you know that there are certain lines that you don't cross, unfortunately. There are comments, there are thoughts, and people participate in various things. There's friend groups that are not diverse, right? There are the same things that we're seeing in the community are inside of these organizations, whether it's military or law enforcement. It's a hard thing to say because, you know, I've served in both law enforcement and the military, and a story that I'll share with you real quickly on the law enforcement side, when the state required diversity training of law enforcement officers, well, it actually was a national move, but the state required law enforcement officers to have specific training in diversity. And I never forget that when I went to, I think, the second training session in the organization that I was serving in, and the person that was over our division and I got into a conversation about African Americans and whites and reparations, and not from the standpoint of 40 acres and a mule kind of thing, or you owe me or whatever, but just a discussion about how me as an African American still upset because a lot of issues of race have not ever been dealt with in anything other than conversation. So this division manager says is this group of law enforcement, white and black women as well, said, when do I as a white man get through paying for the sins of my ancestors of slavery? And I said, never. Right? Until you're willing to acknowledge, right, that it was a sin, and then until you get to the point where you establish a pathway to resolve this in an equitable and an inclusive way, right? And from that day forward, I think that he held something against me, right? Because when I had promotional opportunities, I found out later in life that he was one of the persons that was opposed just because we engaged in that conversation. So when I was in the military, my squad leader was from Iowa. You know, we had been together for a couple of years, and he and I had an honest conversation, and he said, look, I don't believe that whites and blacks ought to mix, right? From where I'm from, you know, white people stay with white people, black people stay with black people. And I think that America would be a lot better off if we were like that. So now here's a guy that you could potentially be in combat with, and you're wondering. So first of all, we got to get out of this denial that behind these walls, that African Americans and people of different races and come from different places are in a place where they're working solidly together, and you don't have these divides where, you know, you got people that's doing these awful things of going back to their respective, what they think are private groups, and expressing themselves in a way that's not inclusive of thought, what have you. And I think as government, and I know in our organization in Gretna, my police department, our department is the only department in Gadsden County that's an accredited department. Small, matter of fact, we're one of the smallest ones in Florida to be accredited. We made that pledge commitment because, one, we wanted to ensure that what we were doing in that little small agency matched up with our counterparts in larger agencies.
To have the validation.
That's right.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And more importantly, we committed ourselves to diversity. I mean, Gretna is 99.9% African American, right? The county is majority minority county, but we make a full commitment to ensuring that our officers, right, don't look only like us, that we've got diversity there. And we've gone from, when I first became manager there in 2006 to now, I can tell you it's probably been 5 years since I've had a complaint from the community, because we require our officers to get out, know the community, sit on the porch with whoever, have a conversation, let these folks know that, you know, that you're not only going to come to their house in response to a law enforcement call, but you're going to be there just to come and have a friendly conversation, what's going on in the community, whatever, So when we reach those points where we've had, that you can hopefully help your community through it.
From a black male perspective, with the video evidence, of other people standing around with their cameras watching it, from a black standpoint, we still are not 100% certain it's going to be enough to get a guilty verdict. And that is problematic. And so when you think about it from that standpoint, George Floyd is every black man in America. We saw ourselves on the ground with that treatment.
I personally don't believe in keeping the name from the community of the officer. If this person is an honorable person, now there may be a question about what has happened, but we shouldn't hide this person, at least from a name perspective. Now we have a responsibility to protect them, but we shouldn't be hiding it, because then it puts the community in this, well, what is it else that you're hiding?
Yes.
Is there something in the officer's employment record that you don't want us to know?
Yes.
Did he do certain things that you now don't want us to know? And it puts the community in the wrong position. If we're going to be committed to transparency, then that needs to be in everything that we do. Sure, we have a responsibility to protect victims at the end of the day, but we should not be standing behind the law when we know that there's no need to protect. Because there's no need to protect this officer's name from the community, because a lot of people already know who it is. Who are we helping in this? And at the end of the day, we're not moving towards a resolve. If we want to see true police reform, we got to break down the bureaucratic walls. I think that what happens for Sheriff McGhee and Chief Revel, you can acknowledge the community. Look, we have not gotten all of this right.
Correct.
Right. We have not gotten all of this right. And we understand the frustration. But not only are we going to have a conversation about where we go from here, but we're going to put into place practices where we can be held accountable. And I say we, as law enforcement executives, we can be held accountable. Of course, obviously the sheriff gets held accountable every 4 years, but the police chief, there's another issue there that has to be worked through. But there should be a way to hold both of these law enforcement agencies accountable for the outcomes that this community expects. That conversation has to happen. They have to make a pledge commitment to that. And we need to have a way to go back and at least check annually. Did we meet our objectives as a combined unit of public safety? Not as the sheriff meet all his goals, the police chief, because a lot of times those are for various, for the sheriff, sometimes it becomes political, and for the police chief because of our form of government and that he's an appointed official, that okay, yeah, I wasn't accountable, but the manager and the deputy city manager really like where we're going, so I get a pass. But I think there has to be a collective community accountability for both these folks, and they can lead in this conversation.
Police chief is appointed by the city commissioner.
That's right.
And of course, the sheriff was elected by the people.
As a city manager, I understand that the person that I appoint as police chief, I'm responsible for that person. Right. So as I make that selection, which I've had to make over my career, I'm thinking through, is that person like me? Right. When I close my eyes at night and go to sleep, can I anticipate that person to decide and to do those things that I can't no longer see because we're separated in distance? Again, I think that they have their moment and they've got to take command of this and don't put forth to the community, feel good things. Right. We got a problem, regardless of what it is, whether it's crime rate as it relates to violent crime, whatever it is, we sit down and put together a public safety collective plan, and that we go back to the community and say, here's what we're planning on doing, and on this date certain, we're going to come back together and say, how did we do? Because I think that has to happen for the community to say, okay, that we're making movements. We're not just talking for the moment. We're not just, getting people peaceful now to go back to their respective homes. We're taking action, and we're going back and measuring ourselves against that. And in a way where we having a community discussion about how you done, not just a nice, fancy, glossy report of, here's what we done, Tallahassee. Right. I don't think that works.
So Antonio said a lot of things that I agree with, and then he said something that jogged my memory, and you mentioned us working for Governor Bush. When Governor Bush was governor years ago, he did something that I was unfamiliar with on the outside. I learned on the inside, is he did citizens hours, where he would have his office set up, the governor's office, in various communities, usually rural communities throughout Florida, and he would commit to half a day in that area, maybe arrive around 8:30, and from about 9 to 1, time, he would be in an office and he would do 15-minute incremental meetings with citizens who would sign up in advance. It would be in line when he would arrive, and he would sit and hear their concerns, take notes, and commit to getting answers to their questions. Whether it's through conversational, there are a lot of people who are in state government who began their career in local government, so they understand the inner workings of how government works itself out. We have aforementioned Sheriff McNeil.
Yeah.
Sheriff McNeil was not only was he also was TPD police chief, he was Secretary of Juvenile Justice and Department of Corrections. So he has an internal understanding of how government works in that regard. And then he also did a role in Quincy there, and then now as our elected sheriff here.
In a Republican administration.
Republican administration. What government comes in at is demanding better. Is the expectation of what's required, because a lot of laws that are governing local governments are happening in the halls of Tallahassee. I think that's important. But I would say here locally on the topic we're talking about here is some conversation to take place similar to what Governor Bush did. And I wrote down community conversation, clergy conversation, city conversation. I think that it's important, encompassing of our commission, to take their meetings on the road. And I'm not just saying when you're trying to convince them about building a new police department. I'm talking about when there's nothing happening in the city. So right now having these conversations, while they're important because everybody's at a heightened level, when there's nothing going on, you can still be taking the meetings to them and having those conversations. You go to any of the city committee commission meetings. It provides access. The clergy conversation. The Old West Enrichment Center on Lake Bradford can hold thousands of people. I think it'd be good to have the city and the county come and have a sit down with local clergy, because here's the thing, as a pastor of a church, my congregants are calling me and asking me as a person who they know is involved in the community and asking me, what's the real story behind the scenes? What's going on? What's happening? You mentioned about not wanting to release a name. It does raise the question of what else are you hiding? What's going on in this regard? We understand unions. There's reasons why you have things in play. I don't have an issue with PBA. They're doing what they are designed to do. My concern is it equal across the board? Would you have given the same courtesy? And if that question is being asked, it's because there are people who don't believe the answer would be yes. And then from a city conversation, it's understanding that there's a divide. When you're on Monroe Street, if I go north on Monroe and I go south on Monroe, it's a different lifestyle. And what lies between South Monroe and North Monroe is one thing, the state capitol. But the plight of the people in South Monroe, where my church is, their lifestyle is different. They believe they're over-policed. They believe that they don't get the leniencies or the safety mechanism as you go on North Monroe Street. But if you're driving,
Much less the businesses.
Exactly, but everything looks different if you go south or north. If you go south of Monroe, you see a lot of fast food restaurants, a lot of food deserts in Tallahassee, mainly on the south side of town. You go north, there's opportunity. And so when you look at it from that standpoint, the capital lies in the middle of all of that.
Antonio, especially in your position as the manager of the city of Gretna,
Sure.
I have to confess, I don't understand when we ask for defunding the police. I don't fully appreciate the significance of the word defund. I hear defund the police, and what I think most Americans are hearing is do away with funding the police. So from a city manager's perspective, what does it mean to you, and have you taken a position on that?
So defunding, whatever the word soup is of the day for the moment that we're in, is all wrong. I think that there has to be a rethinking of public safety, because we are expecting our law enforcement officers to be the be-all, solve-all of our community. When I was a active law enforcement officer, you'd be surprised about the type of calls that we responded to resolve that was nowhere near the law enforcement arena. So I think as we have this conversation about what we should focus our public safety assets on, that's exactly what it is. What are the right things that law enforcement need to go through? I don't agree with this defunding, because the only thing it does is give one side of the equation some idea that we're going to totally disrupt public safety. People don't want that. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants that. Can you imagine a day that we say that, okay, for the next 2 weeks we're closing the police department and everybody's on their own? Yeah. That's never going to happen, right? So let's stop fooling our citizens. Let's stop fooling the people we serve. Let's be real about it. Look, NASA, we got a problem. But in solving this problem, we're going to sit down. But you know what? As a community, I don't know if we're ready even for, if you call it a defunding conversation. Because as a police officer, I'm saying to you, look, you're expecting me to do this whole broad-based range of things, but you're only paying me $45,000 a year. Are you ready to have that conversation? Right? So now I need to be better.
Yeah.
But are you now ready to pull more money out of your pocket for the training, for the salary?
Right.
Because look, I don't know about any of you, but you know, to ask a man or woman in this community to go out there and risk their life and take all of this incoming that comes their way, some good, some bad, is it really worth $45,000 a year?
Yeah.
Ask yourself that question. Yes, it's an honorable profession. Yes, you get into it because it's not about the money, and it shouldn't be about them. Public service should not be about the money.